The sun beat down mercilessly as I carried the last of my moving boxes into Unit 204. Rivulets of sweat traced paths down my back, darkening my already soaked t-shirt. This upscale apartment complex in the suburbs was a significant upgrade from my previous place. Pristine landscaping, modern amenities, and a sense of tranquility I had been craving after years in the crowded city center. I placed the box labeled kitchen on the counter and took a moment to appreciate my new surroundings. The afternoon light streamed through large windows, illuminating the spacious living area. This was my fresh start, a reward for the promotion I had worked so hard to achieve. My sense of accomplishment was short-lived. As I propped my front door open to bring in the remaining items, I noticed the subtle shift in atmosphere whenever neighbors passed by. Conversations would suddenly cease. Curious glances would transform into suspicious stares. Children would be pulled closer to their parents. One elderly gentleman actually stopped in his tracks, looked me up and down, and asked, "Are you delivering something?" When I explained I was moving in, his eyebrows shot up before he mumbled something indecipherable and hurried away. I told myself not to read too much into these interactions. Moving day was stressful enough without adding perceived slights to my mental burden. Yet the pattern continued throughout the afternoon. Friendly greetings were met with tight-lipped nods. Attempts at small talk fizzled out almost immediately. It was during my second trip to the moving truck that I first encountered my next-door neighbor. She stood in her doorway, arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her highlighted blonde hair was styled into a precise bob, not a strand out of place despite the summer humidity. Deep frown lines etched her forehead as she watched me struggle with a heavy shelf. "You are the new tenant?" she asked, though it sounded more like an accusation than a question. Her eyes narrowed as she scanned my appearance. "Yes, I just signed the lease last week. My name is Marcus," I offered, setting down the shelf to extend my hand. She ignored my outstretched palm. "This is a very exclusive community. Very exclusive," she repeated, emphasizing each syllable. "I have lived here for 15 years. I know everyone who belongs here." The implication hung heavy in the air between us. Before I could respond, she continued, "I am Karen Whittington. I am on the Resident Advisory Committee. We enforce certain standards here." Her gaze drifted pointedly to some of my more worn furniture pieces waiting to be carried inside. That night, after unpacking the essentials, I set up my home office. As a software developer, a reliable internet connection was non-negotiable. I had arranged for premium high-speed service to be installed the day before moving in, ensuring I could work remotely without interruption. Over the next few days, I settled into a routine. I would wake early, work until evening, and occasionally explore the community amenities. It was during my third evening that I first noticed Karen's daughter. She stormed through the hallway, complaining loudly on her phone about someone not responding to her messages. The physical resemblance to her mother was striking, the same sharp features and perpetual expression of disapproval. What struck me as odd was how frequently she visited, often staying for hours in the communal spaces. She would spread her belongings across entire tables in the resident lounge or occupy multiple chairs by the pool. She acted less like a visitor and more like someone who believed they owned the place. By the end of my first week, I began experiencing strange issues with my internet connection. Every evening, like clockwork, my video calls would freeze, files would fail to upload, and streaming became impossible. For someone who relied on technology for his livelihood, these disruptions were more than inconvenient. They were potentially damaging to my career. The internet slowdowns continued for another week before I decided to investigate. What had started as a minor annoyance had evolved into a genuine problem affecting my work. Client meetings were being interrupted, deadlines were becoming difficult to meet, and my patience was wearing thin. On Tuesday evening, when my connection once again slowed to a crawl, I logged into my router's administrative panel. The blue light of my computer screen illuminated my concentrated face as I scrolled through connection logs and bandwidth usage statistics. What I found made me sit up straight in my chair. According to the device list, there were 5 devices connected to my network. I owned exactly 3: my laptop, smartphone, and smart TV. The other 2 devices were labeled Brittany's iPhone and Brittany's MacBook Pro. Someone named Brittany was accessing my Wi-Fi without permission. I leaned back in my chair, processing this information. Who was Brittany? How had she obtained my password? I had set up a complex combination of letters, numbers, and special characters that would be nearly impossible to guess. The next evening, I positioned myself by the window at the time the slowdowns typically began. Sure enough, right on schedule, a sleek white car pulled into a spot directly facing my unit. Through the windshield, I could make out a young woman, Karen's daughter, tapping away on her phone. My security camera, which I had installed above my door as a precautionary measure, captured her sitting there for nearly 3 hours. During this exact time frame, my internet speeds plummeted. It could not be coincidence. The next step was gathering irrefutable evidence. I installed network monitoring software that would record all activity, including which websites were being accessed and what files were being downloaded. Over the following days, a disturbing pattern emerged. Brittany was not just checking social media or browsing websites. She was downloading massive video files, streaming on multiple platforms simultaneously, and conducting what appeared to be business activities using my bandwidth. On Thursday alone, she had consumed over 200 gigabytes of data, enough to potentially trigger overage charges on my plan. I reviewed weeks of security footage, matching timestamps with network access logs. The correlation was perfect. Every slowdown corresponded precisely with Brittany's car being parked outside my unit. Sometimes she would arrive in the afternoon, other times she would show up after midnight, but the result was always the same. My internet would become virtually unusable. How had she gained access to my network? The answer came to me one evening as I recalled the installation process. The technician had written down the default password on the router itself, a common practice but a security vulnerability. Karen and her daughter must have seen it during one of their uninvited check-ins on my apartment when I was not home. Several residents had mentioned that Karen frequently used her position on the resident committee to enter units for inspections when tenants were away. What they described as an annoying overreach of authority had actually been a privacy violation with tangible consequences. The question now was how to address the situation. Direct confrontation seemed the obvious choice, but something held me back. Karen had already demonstrated her hostility toward me, and her daughter appeared equally entitled. There was no reason to believe they would admit wrongdoing or cease their theft of my service. Instead, I decided to document everything meticulously. I created spreadsheets tracking the dates, times, and duration of unauthorized access. I saved screenshots of connection logs showing Brittany's devices. I compiled video evidence from my security camera showing her car positioned outside my apartment during these periods. As a software developer, I understood the importance of having immutable proof before making accusations. In my profession, data told the truth when words could be twisted or denied, and the data I had gathered told a very clear story of deliberate, ongoing theft. On Friday night, after particularly aggressive network usage had disrupted an important client meeting, I made my decision. The time for passive observation was over. I would change my Wi-Fi password and set up notifications for any attempted connections. This would either stop the theft or force a confrontation. Either outcome would be preferable to the current situation. As I typed in a new, even more complex password, I felt a strange mixture of apprehension and satisfaction. Something told me this simple act would trigger a chain of events that would reveal far more about my new community than I had anticipated. My finger hovered over the Save Changes button for just a moment before I clicked, setting everything in motion. Morning light filtered through my blinds as I finalized the password change on my network. I had selected a completely random string of characters that would be impossible to guess. Additionally, I had enabled notifications that would alert me whenever someone attempted to access my network unsuccessfully. NetSecure 9x $7 PLQ2 replaced the previous password. I also changed the network name from the generic Apartment 2-4 to something more personalized, Marcus Net Private. These changes would make it abundantly clear that this was a private, secured network. I felt a small smile play across my lips as I imagined the confusion this would cause. Perhaps it was petty, but after weeks of having my service stolen and my work disrupted, I felt entitled to this minor victory. The satisfaction did not last long. By early afternoon, my phone began buzzing with notifications. Someone was repeatedly attempting to access my network with incorrect passwords. Within the span of 30 minutes, there had been 27 failed login attempts. I moved to my window and peered through the blinds. As expected, the white car was parked in its usual spot. Through the windshield, I could see Brittany, her face contorted with frustration as she jabbed at her phone screen. She looked up at my window several times, her expression growing increasingly agitated. After approximately 40 minutes of failed attempts, she stepped out of her car and stormed toward the building entrance. My security camera captured her speaking animatedly on her phone, gesturing toward my apartment with her free hand. I returned to my desk, anticipating what would come next. The confrontation was inevitable now. I opened my evidence files and kept them ready on my computer screen. Whatever happened, I would be prepared. 30 minutes later, thunderous knocking rattled my apartment door. The force was so aggressive that the decorative wreath I had hung swayed precariously. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and approached the door calmly. Standing in my doorway were two women, Karen and Brittany, both red-faced and visibly agitated. Karen had her arms crossed tightly over her chest, while Brittany clutched her laptop to her side, her knuckles white from the grip. "Is there a problem?" I asked, maintaining a neutral tone despite the hostility radiating from them. "Yes, there is a problem," Karen snapped. "You need to fix whatever you did to the internet, right now." I tilted my head slightly, feigning confusion. "I am not sure I understand. What makes you think I did something to your internet?" "Do not play dumb," Brittany interjected, stepping forward. "Everything was working fine until today. I have important business to conduct, and suddenly I cannot connect anymore." "Connect to what exactly?" I asked innocently. Brittany's eyes widened as she realized her mistake. The Wi-Fi," she stammered. "The internet connection that was working perfectly until you messed with it." "How would anything I do affect your internet connection?" I pressed. "Do you not have your own service?" Karen shot her daughter a warning glare before turning back to me. "The building has shared Wi-Fi," she lied smoothly. "As part of the resident committee, I know that you have been tampering with community resources." "That is interesting," I replied, "because when I signed my lease, I was told explicitly that each unit is responsible for arranging their own internet service. There is no shared building Wi-Fi. I have the documentation right here if you would like to see it." Brittany's composure cracked further. "I need access for my social media business. I have thousands of followers waiting for content," she blurted before her mother elbowed her sharply. "What my daughter means," Karen said coldly, "is that you are disrupting the community harmony we have established here. Perhaps you would be more comfortable in a different type of living situation, somewhere more appropriate for your needs." The implication was clear, and my patience was running thin. Still, I maintained my calm demeanor. "To clarify, are you suggesting I should move out because I secured my private internet connection that I pay for?" "We know the building manager very well," Karen threatened, ignoring my question. "He values the opinion of long-term residents, especially those on the committee. It would be unfortunate if certain complaints were to arise about your unit." With that thinly veiled threat hanging in the air, they turned and walked away. Brittany glanced back once, her expression a mixture of frustration and entitlement that suggested this matter was far from resolved. I closed my door slowly, processing what had just happened. They had essentially admitted to using my Wi-Fi without permission, threatened me when I prevented their theft, and implied they would use their influence to cause problems for me. As I returned to my computer, I saved the new security footage of our confrontation. Something told me I would need as much documentation as possible in the coming days. This was no longer just about internet access. It had escalated into something far more concerning. The retaliation began almost immediately. The morning after our confrontation, an official notice appeared under my door. Noise complaint. Resident in Unit 204 reported for excessive noise between 11:00 p.m. and 2:00 a.m. This was particularly absurd since I had been on a video call with overseas clients during those exact hours, wearing headphones and speaking quietly. 2 days later, another notice arrived. Suspicious activity report, unusual comings and goings from Unit 204, security review pending. Again, completely fabricated. I had barely left my apartment that week due to project deadlines. The notices continued arriving with alarming frequency. Each one contained vague allegations that were impossible to disprove definitively. Some claimed I was violating building policies regarding appropriate use of common areas. Others suggested neighbors had reported concerning behavior. All were anonymous, but I had no doubt about their source. Karen was using her position on the resident committee to harass me through official channels. It was a calculated approach. Each individual complaint might seem minor, but collectively they were building a case against me. The impact extended beyond paper notices. My trips to the communal laundry room became uncomfortable experiences as conversations would halt abruptly when I entered. In the elevator, residents who had previously made small talk now stared fixedly at their phones or the floor numbers changing above. At the mailboxes, a neighbor who had once helped me locate the nearest grocery store now avoided eye contact entirely. When our paths crossed unavoidably, he mumbled something about being late and hurried away. The community that had already felt somewhat unwelcoming was now actively hostile. Through my window, I observed Karen engaging in hushed conversations with various residents, frequently glancing toward my unit. Her daughter Brittany had taken to parking her car in different spots around the complex, no longer directly outside my window, but still within range of other units. I suspected she was attempting to access other residents' Wi-Fi networks now that mine was secured. On Thursday afternoon, while working on a coding problem, a sharp knock interrupted my concentration. Through the peephole, I saw a slender man in a polo shirt embroidered with the building management logo. He held a clipboard and wore an expression of practiced neutrality. "Good afternoon, I am Richard from building management," he introduced himself when I opened the door. "We have received several complaints about this unit and need to conduct an inspection." "What kind of complaints?" I asked, though I already knew. Richard consulted his clipboard, avoiding direct eye contact. "Noise disturbances, unauthorized modifications to the unit, potential policy violations. Standard procedure requires we investigate all reports." I stepped aside to let him enter, watching as he scanned my immaculately kept apartment with poorly disguised surprise. Clearly, he had expected to find evidence supporting the complaints. "As you can see," I said calmly, "there are no unauthorized modifications. I have not even hung pictures yet because I wanted to check the policy on wall anchors first." Richard nodded, making notes on his form. "And the noise complaints. Multiple residents have reported loud music and disruptions during late hours." "That is interesting," I replied, moving toward my computer, "because I have been tracking my own activities. I maintain a detailed work log due to client billing requirements." I opened my calendar, showing him my schedule for the past 2 weeks. During the times mentioned in these complaints, I was either on documented video calls with clients in different time zones or asleep. I have records of all meetings. Richard's expression shifted from professional detachment to mild discomfort. He clearly had not expected such organized documentation. "While we are discussing documentation," I continued, "I would like to share something concerning with you." I opened the folder containing my evidence of Wi-Fi theft. Methodically, I walked him through the network logs, security footage, and timestamps showing the consistent pattern of unauthorized access. I played the recording of Karen and Brittany at my door, demanding I fix my internet. "This has been going on since my arrival," I explained. "When I secured my network, they threatened to use their influence with building management against me. The sudden influx of complaints seems to confirm that threat." Richard's expression transitioned from discomfort to genuine concern as he viewed the evidence. "This is concerning," he admitted, removing his cap and running a hand through his hair. "Wi-Fi theft is actually illegal, and the building has strict policies against harassment." "I am not looking to escalate the situation," I assured him. "I simply want to live here peacefully and have my property respected." He nodded, returning his cap to his head. "I will look into this situation," he promised, though his tone lacked conviction. "In the meantime, continue documenting any further incidents." As he left, his parting words offered little comfort. These things can be complicated when long-term residents are involved. The resident committee does have significant influence. From my window, I watched Richard walk directly to Karen's unit. Through the blinds, I could see animated gesturing and Karen's increasingly reddened face. The conversation appeared heated, with Richard repeatedly referring to his clipboard while Karen pointed emphatically toward my apartment. That evening, as I prepared dinner, my phone buzzed with a meeting invitation. "Resident Dispute Resolution, Monday, 2:00 p.m. Community Room." The message indicated that building management would mediate a discussion between myself and the concerned parties to resolve ongoing issues. A formal confrontation was now inevitable. I spent the weekend organizing my evidence, preparing my statements and steeling myself for what would certainly be an unpleasant encounter. Little did I know that the most dramatic episode was yet to come. Sunday arrived with perfect weather, clear blue skies, gentle breeze, and temperatures warm enough to justify a few hours by the pool. After days confined to my apartment documenting harassment, I desperately needed fresh air and relaxation. The community pool area was one of the complex's highlights: crystal clear water surrounded by comfortable lounge chairs, manicured greenery, and a small bar serving refreshments. I arrived early, securing a chair in a quiet corner where I could read undisturbed. For 2 peaceful hours, I alternated between swimming laps and making progress through a novel I had been neglecting. The other residents largely ignored me, which felt like an improvement over active hostility. A few new tenants I had not met before even nodded politely in greeting. The tranquility shattered at precisely 1:43 p.m. I noted the time because I had just checked my watch, wondering if I should head back to my apartment soon. The pool gate slammed open with such force that several people startled in their chairs. Brittany stormed in, designer sunglasses perched atop her head, phone clutched in her manicured hand. She scanned the area like a predator searching for prey. When her gaze locked onto me, her entire body stiffened. For a moment, she froze, as if deciding her next move. I returned my attention to my book, hopping to avoid confrontation in such a public setting. From my peripheral vision, I could see her whispering furiously to 2 women nearby, regular companions of Karen whom I had seen at resident committee gatherings. The whispering spread like ripples in water, faces turning in my direction with newly awakened interest. The peaceful atmosphere had shifted to one of anticipation, as if everyone sensed the approaching storm. Brittany walked purposefully around the pool, stopping directly in front of my lounge chair, her shadow falling across my book. I looked up, maintaining a neutral expression despite the tension coiling in my chest. "That is him," she announced loudly, pointing an accusatory finger at me. "That is the one harassing me and my mother." Conversations around the pool ceased immediately. Sunglasses lowered as curious eyes turned toward the unfolding drama. A child who had been splashing happily was quickly ushered from the pool by a concerned parent. "Excuse me," I said calmly, placing my book aside and sitting upright. "Do not act innocent," Brittany continued, her voice rising. "You have been targeting us ever since you moved in. You are the one causing all the problems." I remained seated, conscious that standing might appear confrontational. "I am not sure what you are referring to. Perhaps we could discuss this privately." "Everyone needs to know what you are doing," she insisted, turning to address the growing audience. "He has been using technology to harass us, cutting off access, spying, recording. He is obsessed with my mother and me." The absurdity of the accusation might have been laughable in a different context. As it was, I could only watch as she constructed an elaborate fiction for her captivated audience. "He moved in and immediately started causing problems," she continued. "Breaking community rules, making noise at all hours, and now technology harassment. He does not belong in a place like this." The phrase hung in the air, its implication unmistakable. Several residents shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, while others nodded in agreement. "People like you should be grateful to even live in a place like this," she added, her voice dropping to a performative hush that nonetheless carried across the now silent pool area. "Instead, you target respected community members." My patience evaporated. While I had no desire for public confrontation, I would not allow such blatant dishonesty and prejudice to go unchallenged. What you are describing is interesting, I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger burning in my chest. Especially considering I have extensive documentation of you stealing my Wi-Fi for weeks, then demanding access when I secured my network. Brittany's eyes widened momentarily before narrowing with renewed fury. That is a lie. How dare you accuse me? I have security footage of you parked outside my unit for hours, using my internet without permission, I continued. I have network logs showing your devices, Brittany's iPhone and Brittany's MacBook connecting to my router. I have recordings of you and your mother at my door demanding I fix the internet after I changed my password. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Is that even legal?" Another voice responded, "It is definitely theft of service." Brittany's composure cracked visibly. Her cheeks flushed crimson as she realized her narrative was unraveling. "You are twisting everything. Mom was right about you people." The racial undertone was no longer subtle. Several onlookers gasped at the comment. An older gentleman stood up and walked away, shaking his head in disgust. Two young women began recording the interaction on their phones. "I have shared all my evidence with building management," I said, gathering my belongings calmly. "We have a meeting tomorrow to discuss it. I would suggest you prepare your explanation." Something in Brittany snapped. She lunged forward, knocking my book into the pool with a deliberate swipe of her arm. "You think anyone will believe you over us? Do you know who my mother is in this community? Do you know who we know?" Her voice had risen to a shriek that echoed across the water. More phones appeared, capturing her meltdown from multiple angles. A resident I recognized from the floor above mine shook her head and muttered, "Just like what happened with the Gonzalez family last year." Richard, the building manager, burst through the pool gate, perspiration dotting his forehead. "What is going on here?" he demanded, looking between Brittany and me with evident distress. "He attacked me," Brittany declared, though dozens of witnesses had seen the opposite. "He threatened me and said he has been recording me." Richard turned to me, his expression a mixture of exasperation and resignation. "Mr. Williams, perhaps it would be best if you return to your unit while we sort this out." "Certainly," I agreed, gathering my remaining belongings. "I am happy to review the pool security footage with you later. I believe it will clarify exactly what happened here." As I walked toward the exit, Brittany continued her tirade, now directing her fury at Richard for not immediately ejecting me from the premises. Her voice carried across the complex, drawing curious onlookers from neighboring buildings. "You are all going to regret this," she shouted after me. "My mother will make sure of it. You do not know who you are dealing with." I returned to my apartment, my brief moment of relaxation thoroughly ruined, but with a strange sense of vindication. The confrontation had been public, witnessed by dozens, with many recording the interaction. Brittany had revealed her true nature for all to see, undermining any narrative Karen might try to construct. That evening my phone buzzed with a text message from Richard. "Meeting tomorrow changed to include property owner. Conference room, 2 p.m. Bring all documentation." The inclusion of the property owner elevated the situation significantly. Typically, such disputes were handled by on-site management only. Whatever was coming tomorrow would be more consequential than I had anticipated. The conference room felt unnecessarily formal for an apartment dispute. Located in the administrative wing of the complex, it featured a large mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs, framed architectural drawings of the property, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the central courtyard. I arrived 15 minutes early, evidence folder neatly arranged before me. I had printed key screenshots, organized my digital evidence on a tablet, and prepared a timeline of events beginning with my move-in date. Professional habits die hard. As a developer, I approached this meeting with the same methodical organization I would bring to a client presentation. At precisely 2:00 p.m., the door opened. Karen and Brittany entered first, both dressed as if attending a business meeting rather than a dispute resolution. Karen wore a tailored blazer over a silk blouse, while Brittany had opted for a conservative dress that contrasted sharply with her pool attire from the previous day. Their expressions betrayed confidence, smug smiles that suggested they anticipated a favorable outcome. Their assurance faltered visibly when an unfamiliar man followed Richard into the room. Tall, distinguished, and impeccably dressed in a custom suit, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to making consequential decisions. "Good afternoon," Richard began, his professional demeanor more pronounced than during our previous interactions. "Before we address the specific complaints, I would like to introduce Mr. James Harrington, the property owner who acquired Oakwood Terrace 6 months ago." Karen's smile froze. Brittany's eyes widened. Neither had apparently been informed of his attendance. "Mr. Harrington has taken a personal interest in this situation and requested to be present for its resolution," Richard continued, gesturing toward the head of the table where the owner took his seat. Mr. Harrington surveyed the room, his gaze lingering momentarily on each of us. He was, I now noticed, a black man approximately in his 50s, with subtle gray at his temples and keen, observant eyes. "Thank you for joining us today," Mr. Harrington began, his voice measured and authoritative. "I make it a point to be directly involved when serious allegations arise in my properties. Richard has briefed me on the situation, but I would like to hear from all parties." Karen recovered her composure quickly, leaning forward with practiced concern. "Mr. Harrington, we are so pleased to finally meet you. As a 15-year resident and committee member, I can assure you that until recently, we have never experienced such disruption to our community harmony." She launched into a carefully constructed narrative about my arrival coinciding with numerous complaints, suspicious activities, and a sudden decline in community standards. Brittany nodded in solemn agreement beside her, occasionally adding details to her mother's account. Throughout their presentation, Mr. Harrington remained impassive, occasionally making notes on a leather-bound portfolio. When they finished, he thanked them politely before turning to me. "Mr. Williams, would you care to respond to these allegations?" "Yes, sir," I replied, opening my evidence folder. "I believe the documentation I have gathered speaks more clearly than any explanation I could offer." I presented my evidence methodically. Network logs showing unauthorized connections from Brittany's devices, security footage capturing her car, positioned outside my apartment during these connections, timestamps correlating the Wi-Fi usage with her presence, and finally, the recording of their confrontation at my door. "Additionally," I continued, "I have compiled a record of the retaliatory actions taken since I secured my network." I displayed the numerous complaint notices, all filed after our confrontation, and the security footage from the pool incident. Mr. Harrington reviewed each piece of evidence with careful attention. As he examined the materials, Richard reluctantly added, "We do have additional context that may be relevant." With Mr. Harrington's permission, Richard accessed the building's complaint database on his tablet. There appears to be a pattern of similar complaints against minority residents dating back several years. The Gonzalez family in 2021, Dr. Chen in 2023, and the Patels just last year, all filed by Ms. Whittington, and all ultimately resulting in those tenants choosing not to renew their leases. Karen's face flushed with indignation. That is completely different. Those situations involved legitimate violations of community standards. Actually, Richard countered, emboldened by Mr. Harrington's presence, our records indicate that none of those complaints were ever substantiated. Investigation notes suggest they were largely based on cultural differences, cooking odors, family gatherings, religious observances. Mr. Harrington removed his glasses, pinching the bridge of his nose briefly before addressing Karen directly. Ms. Whittington, when I purchased this property, I reviewed its financial and operational history extensively. One pattern that concerned me was the unusually high turnover rate among certain demographic groups, particularly in buildings where the resident committee had significant influence. He turned to face Brittany. As for the unauthorized use of another resident's Wi-Fi service, that constitutes theft of service under state law. The evidence Mr. Williams has presented appears quite conclusive. Karen's confident demeanor had completely dissolved. Brittany stared fixedly at the table, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Given the documentation presented today, Mr. Harrington continued, I have made my decision regarding this matter. The Morning Sun illuminated an official notice posted on Karen's door. The document, visible to anyone passing through the hallway, detailed policy violations, resulting in termination of tenancy. Residents gathered in small clusters nearby, conversations hushed but animated as they discussed this unexpected development. I collected my mail, conscious of the curious glances directed my way. For once, these looks contained no suspicion or hostility, only interest and, from some, a hint of newfound respect. As I sorted through envelopes, Sarah from Unit 210 approached hesitantly. She was an older woman who had previously averted her eyes whenever we passed in the hallway. I wanted to apologize, she said softly. My grandmother lives with me, and she experienced similar treatment from Karen last year. We should have spoken up sooner. Throughout the day, similar interactions occurred. Michael from the floor above admitted Karen had threatened to report his service dog as a violation of pet policy. The Gonzalez family from the West Building confirmed they had moved out after months of fabricated complaints about cooking odors and excessive visitors. She did the same thing to us, Mrs. Gonzalez explained when I encountered her near the mailboxes. We complained to the previous management, but nothing ever happened. We just got tired of fighting. The community was slowly revealing its true nature. Not inherently hostile, but intimidated into silence by a dominant few who had established a culture of exclusion and fear. 3 weeks after the eviction notice appeared, Mr. Harrington called a community-wide meeting in the resident lounge. The spacious room filled quickly, with attendance far exceeding typical gathering numbers. Curiosity had drawn even the most reclusive residents from their units. Oakwood Terrace was designed to be a community in the truest sense of the word, Mr. Harrington began, standing confidently before the assembled residents. A place where diversity of background and experience enriches everyone's living environment. Recent,